My Sister's Heartbreak and My Wedding Decision. Reddit family. In today's story, we delve into a heartbreaking experience from a Reddit family post that will leave you reflecting on family relationships and the emotional struggles that come with them. Watch as the story unfolds, revealing family betrayal, complex emotions, and the journey of self-healing. If you find this story relatable, don't forget to give us a like and subscribe to Silent Wars for more heartfelt stories just like this one. In the midst of the holiday season, I was eagerly planning my wedding. At 30 years old, my fiancé and I had been preparing for this special day for nearly a year. We had carefully selected a date in December, falling right in the heart of the Christmas season, when the world is busy and full of festive chaos. It wasn't an extravagant affair, just a simple wedding with close friends and family. Our intention was to have an intimate celebration, not an over-the-top event. There would be no wild bachelorette parties or lavish pre-wedding celebrations. Instead, we were keeping it modest, just a ceremony followed by a nice meal for about 50 people. But as the wedding day approached, things started to get complicated. My mother wasn't exactly thrilled with the wedding plans. She had her reasons, though I didn't fully understand them at first. The issue stemmed from my sister, who had experienced a deeply painful event just a few months before. She had been preparing for her own wedding, but her fiancé had abandoned her at the altar. That was a traumatic experience for her, one that left her devastated and heartbroken. My mother, deeply concerned for my sister's well-being, feared that holding my wedding so soon after such an emotional blow would be too much for my sister to bear. She believed it would hurt her feelings, and perhaps cause her to feel even more betrayed by the family. I understand my mother's concern, and I sympathized with my sister. Being left at the altar is one of the worst experiences anyone could go through. However, I also believe that my wedding wasn't something I could, or should alter simply to make my sister feel better. The decision to get married had been made long before my sister's situation. In fact, my fiancé and I had planned our wedding a full year in advance, and everyone knew the date. We had chosen this particular time because of our schedules, and it simply wasn't feasible to change it at this point. The problem, however, was that as things seemed to be falling into place for my wedding, my family decided to make a huge issue of it. I was frustrated, especially since I had tried so hard to plan a low-key, intimate event that wouldn't cause unnecessary drama. It felt like they were turning what was supposed to be a joyful occasion into yet another family conflict. My sister, who was 3 years older than I, had been married once before. Her first marriage had ended amicably after just 2 years, and since then, she had remained single. When we announced our wedding, she had just started dating someone new. But within a few weeks, she was suddenly talking about getting married to him. I found this a bit odd. Getting married after only a few months of dating didn't seem like the best idea to me, especially after her previous marriage had ended. Still, I didn't want to intervene and let her make her own choices. I only raised my concerns out of care, asking if she was sure about this relationship, but she became defensive and dismissed my concerns. The situation escalated when my sister's wedding plans crumbled. They had arranged a small, intimate wedding with only a handful of guests, but when the day arrived, her fiancé didn't show up. He didn't call or explain, and it left her waiting at the church, humiliated and devastated. Afterward, my sister blamed me for ruining her chances of happiness. Even though I didn't say "I told you so" or anything along those lines, she couldn't help but feel that my wedding somehow interfered with hers. After her wedding was cancelled, my sister and I grew more distant. She became resentful of me, and I tried reaching out, offering support, but she ignored me. A few months later, she barely acknowledged my wedding plans when I brought them up. It was clear that she was still struggling with her own feelings of rejection and loss. My mother, too, started pressuring me to change my wedding plans, suggesting that I cancel the venue and have a much smaller ceremony to accommodate my sister's feelings. I explained to her that the wedding had been planned for a year, and that canceling or changing things now would result in significant financial loss. I couldn't just throw everything away because my sister was still grieving. Despite my attempts to make them understand, my mother's requests continued. She even tried to gaslight me by saying, "If you love your sister, you should do this for her," implying that if I could postpone my wedding for my fiancé's work, I should do the same for my sister's emotional recovery. I was outraged. How could she ask me to sacrifice my happiness for the sake of someone who was unwilling to acknowledge my feelings and needs? After a lot of internal conflict and pressure from my family, I decided to stand my ground. My fiancé, although sympathetic to my sister's pain, supported me and agreed that we should proceed with our original plans. But my family's continued interference left me feeling emotionally drained. They blamed me for not catering to my sister's needs, and my sister became increasingly bitter and resentful. The tension in the air was palpable, but I had made up my mind I would not let my family's drama ruin the most important day of my life. In the weeks leading up to my wedding, I had been filled with excitement and anticipation. I was finally going to marry the man I loved, and we had been planning our wedding for over a year. However, my joy was overshadowed by a growing sense of frustration and conflict within my family, especially with my mother and sister. My sister's life had recently been thrown into turmoil when her fiancé had abandoned her at the altar, and my mother, deeply concerned for her, began pressuring me to alter my wedding plans out of consideration for my sister's feelings. The situation became increasingly complicated when my mother asked me to cancel or significantly downsize my wedding. She felt that my wedding, happening so soon after my sister's heartbreaking experience, would be too much for her to handle. She suggested that I hold a smaller ceremony, or even get married at a church with only a few close friends and family members. While I understood my mother's desire to protect my sister's emotions, I couldn't ignore the fact that this was my wedding, and I had every right to have it as planned. My fiancé and I had already made our arrangements, and canceling the venue or making drastic changes would result in a significant financial loss. The pressure mounted as my mother continued to argue that I needed to consider my sister's grief. She told me that canceling the wedding would give my sister more time to recover and allow her to heal from the pain of being abandoned. She even went as far as suggesting that I move my wedding to the following summer, which was not an option due to work commitments we had already made. When I explained that we had already paid for the majority of the wedding expenses, and that changing the plans would result in a tremendous loss, my mother insisted that I cancel the wedding to respect my sister's feelings. The emotional manipulation became more intense as I navigated my relationship with my sister. She had been bitter towards me ever since her own wedding had been ruined, and I found it increasingly difficult to make her happy. The more I tried to support her, the more she blamed me for ruining her chance at happiness. In her mind, I was insensitive to her pain, and no matter what I did, she couldn't seem to accept my happiness. She even went so far as to accuse me of being selfish for planning my wedding, while she was still grieving her own failed engagement. As the wedding day drew nearer, my sister's bitterness continued to grow. She spread rumors about me to other family members, claiming that I was insensitive and selfish for moving forward with my wedding. At one point, she even tried to rally the family to boycott my wedding, hoping to teach me a lesson about respecting the feelings of those close to me. This only fueled the tension in our already fractured relationship. My mother, too, sided with my sister, calling me selfish and demanding that I change my wedding plans to accommodate her. Despite all the emotional turmoil, I remained firm in my decision to proceed with my wedding as planned. I was tired of the constant manipulation and guilt-tripping. The stress and the guilt were overwhelming, but I had come to realize that I couldn't sacrifice my own happiness for the sake of others who were unwilling to support me. I made it clear to my family that if they couldn't respect my decision, they were no longer welcome to attend. I sent them an email saying they were no longer invited to the wedding, and I began to feel a sense of relief. In the end, my wedding day arrived, and it was everything I had hoped for. It was a celebration of love and new beginnings, not just for me and my fiancé, but also for the healing process that had begun in my heart. Although my sister wasn't there, I felt her presence in other ways. I kept a beautiful bouquet she had sent as a symbol of her role in my life, even though she couldn't bring herself to attend. My mother, after much reflection and heartfelt apologies, attended the wedding, and we shared a meaningful moment of reconciliation. Despite the heartache and the struggles leading up to my wedding, I realized that my decision to move forward with my plans was the right one. It wasn't just about having a beautiful wedding, it was about reclaiming my own happiness and not allowing my family's unresolved issues to dictate the course of my life. The wedding was more than just the union of two people. It was a moment of healing, personal growth, and the beginning of a new chapter in my life. My wedding was supposed to be a joyous occasion, a day to celebrate love and new beginnings with the person I had chosen to spend the rest of my life with. We had been planning for months, carefully selecting every detail to make it perfect. But as the big day approached, I found myself torn between the excitement of marrying the man I loved and the mounting tension within my family, particularly with my sister and mother. The emotional weight of my sister's abandonment at the altar weighed heavily on the situation, and my mother's insistence that I tone down my wedding in deference to her grief created an impossible dilemma. My sister, who had been engaged before me, had been left at the altar by her fiancé. It was a traumatic experience for her, one that left her heartbroken and deeply wounded. But as much as I empathized with her pain, my own happiness could not be sacrificed to make up for her loss. My wedding was something that I had dreamed of for years, and my fiancé and I had made the decision long before my sister's heartbreak. I understood my mother's desire to protect my sister's feelings, but I felt as though she was asking me to erase my own joy for the sake of someone else's pain. The conflict reached a boiling point when my mother began suggesting that I cancel or drastically reduce the scale of my wedding. She argued that it would be too difficult for my sister to see me get married so soon after her own wedding had been ruined. But the truth was, I had already made the arrangements, and changing them would result in significant financial losses. The venue, the food, and the decorations had already been paid for, and canceling them would mean a substantial financial hit that we could not afford. I explained all of this to my mother, but she remained insistent. She even suggested that I move the wedding to next summer, but that was not a viable option given the work commitments that had already been set. My mother's demand that I cancel my wedding felt like an impossible choice. She told me that it was the better way to respect my sister's feelings and give her time to recover. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I had no obligation to put my own life on hold, just because my sister's life had taken an unexpected turn. My wedding wasn't just an event, it was a celebration of my love, my happiness, and my future with the person I had chosen to marry. I had worked hard to get to this point, and I wasn't going to let my family's issues dictate how I spent this important day. As the days passed, the tension between my family and me only grew. My sister, who had been struggling with her own feelings of betrayal and jealousy, began spreading rumors about me. She accused me of being insensitive and selfish for moving forward with my wedding while she was still grieving. Her bitterness was palpable, and no matter how much I tried to reach out to her, it felt like there was no way to bridge the gap between us. She even tried to rally the family to boycott my wedding, hoping to teach me a lesson in respect. This only added fuel to the fire, and I began to question whether I was making the right decision by standing my ground. But in the end, I chose to prioritize my own happiness. I sent an email to my mother and sister, informing them that they were no longer invited to my wedding. It was a difficult decision, but it was necessary for me to take control of my own life. I had spent too many years being the good daughter, trying to please everyone at my own expense. This time I was going to do what was best for me. The wedding day finally arrived, and it was everything I had hoped for. It was a beautiful, intimate celebration with our closest friends and family. Despite the absence of my sister, I felt a sense of peace and joy that I hadn't experienced in months. The ceremony was everything I had dreamed of, and the reception was filled with love and laughter. My mother, who had been so adamant about changing the plans, surprised me with an emotional speech acknowledging her past mistakes. It was a moment of healing, and it marked the beginning of a new chapter in our relationship. As I look back on that day, I realized that my decision to stand firm in my wedding plans was the right one. It wasn't just about the wedding, it was about asserting my independence and taking charge of my own happiness. Sometimes we have to make tough decisions in order to move forward and let go of the things that hold us back. My wedding was a celebration of love, but it was also a moment of personal growth and healing. And in the end, it was worth every bit of the struggle. The year I turned 22 should have been just another milestone, but it became one of the most pivotal and painful moments in my life. I grew up in a family where love was conditional, where expectations were high and emotional support was scarce. My father, Banks, had always been emotionally distant, a man of harsh words and high standards. My younger brother, Alan, had quickly learned to win his favor, leaving me as the perpetual scapegoat. I had spent my entire childhood trying to earn approval from my father, but it never came. Instead, I was constantly belittled and pushed aside. When the family decided to go on a road trip to Colorado for my uncle's wedding, I thought maybe this could be a moment of bonding. a break from the usual chaos. I was wrong. From the beginning, things went awry. My father and Alan spent the trip making cruel jokes at my expense, and my mother Irene passively watched it all unfold, occasionally offering weak protests that never amounted to anything. This pattern of neglect and cruelty had been my reality for as long as I could remember, but I had hoped that, as an adult, things would be different. The road trip proved that nothing had changed. The worst moment came when we stopped at a rest area in the middle of nowhere in Colorado. I was exhausted and needed a break. I left the car to use the bathroom, leaving my phone and wallet behind. When I came out, the car was gone. I assumed it was a joke at first, a cruel prank to teach me some sort of lesson. But as time passed and no one returned, the weight of abandonment began to settle in. I was alone at a rest stop, stranded with nothing but the clothes on my back. I walked around the area, hoping to find some sign of them, but there was nothing. I sat there for what felt like hours waiting for someone to come back. A trucker asked if I was okay, but I lied and told him I was waiting for a friend. Deep down, I knew this wasn't just a prank. I had been left behind. My family, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, had discarded me without a second thought. As the hours stretched on, I realized I had to take matters into my own hands. I found a stranger who allowed me to use their phone, and I called a local shelter. That night, I stayed in the shelter, with nothing but the clothes on my back and a sense of deep humiliation. I had no money, no identification, and no way to contact anyone. But I wasn't going to let this defeat me. I worked hard to get my life back on track. The next day, I found a job washing dishes at a small diner, and within a week, I had earned enough to buy a cheap phone and begin the process of getting an ID replacement. I wasn't sure how I was going to get by, but I knew I couldn't go back to my family. The weeks that followed were grueling. I worked double shifts, slept in the shelter, and wore donated clothes. But I was determined to rebuild my life. I got my first paycheck and used it to buy a cheap phone, finally gaining some semblance of control over my situation. It wasn't easy, but slowly I started to make progress. The more time passed, the more I realized that I didn't need my family to survive. I could do this on my own. Months later, when I was finally settled in a small apartment, my mother called me. She said they had been looking for me and were worried. She claimed it had all been a joke, but I knew better. I had spent my entire life trying to win their approval, but they had never cared about me. Now they were asking for my help, but I wasn't about to give them what they wanted. I blocked their numbers, cut ties with them, and focused on building the life I had always wanted. Years passed and I slowly began to heal. I built a life for myself, free from the toxic expectations of my parents. I found friends who treated me with kindness, and I started working my way up from dishwasher to assistant manager. But the pain of being abandoned by my own family stayed with me, even as I moved forward. One day, I received a message from my mother, asking for help. She explained that my father had medical debts, Alan was in trouble again, and my mother needed knee surgery she couldn't afford. But their need for money wasn't the real issue. The truth was they hadn't changed. They were still the same people who had left me stranded at that rest stop. This time I didn't feel anger or resentment. I simply felt a deep sense of pity for them. They had failed me when I needed them most, and now they were reaping the consequences of their actions. In the end, I didn't give them what they wanted. I didn't need their approval anymore. I had created a life for myself, one built on my terms, and I was determined to keep moving forward. The past could never be erased, but I had learned the most important lesson. The best revenge is living well. The past 5 years have been a journey of healing and rediscovery. A journey that started on a dark, lonely day at a rest stop in Colorado. At 22, I was abandoned by my own family, left stranded with nothing but the clothes on my back. It was a moment of profound betrayal that shaped my life, but it also ignited the strength I never knew I had. The experience forced me to build a life on my own terms, free from the toxic influence of the family that had long made me feel like I didn't belong. My family had always been dysfunctional, but that day, when they left me behind at a rest stop, it became painfully clear that their neglect had no bounds. It wasn't just a one-time mistake. It was the culmination of years of emotional abuse, where I was constantly the punching bag for my father, Banks, and my golden child brother Alan. My mother Irene was always passive, never standing up for me, letting the cruelty unfold without intervention. I had spent my whole life trying to earn their approval. But that day I realized that no matter how hard I tried, it would never come. In the days that followed, I took matters into my own hands. I sought help from a stranger, got in touch with a shelter, and began rebuilding my life. I found a job washing dishes at a diner and worked tirelessly to get back on my feet. Slowly, I got my ID replaced, bought a cheap phone, and began to carve out a space for myself. Despite being homeless for a short while, I found strength I didn't know I had. It was a stark contrast to the life I had known, but it was my life and it was mine to rebuild. Months later, I had my own apartment, a small place above a laundromat. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I worked my way up in the diner from dishwasher to assistant manager. I found stability, and for the first time I didn't feel like I was living for anyone else. I built a support network of people who treated me with kindness and respect, people who didn't see me as a failure. I was free. But even as I moved forward, I never fully left the past behind. My family still lingered in the background. My mother called several times, leaving messages asking for help. She claimed they had been looking for me and that they were worried. But I knew better. Their concern was never for me. It was always about what they could get from me. And this time I didn't give in. I blocked their numbers and cut ties with them completely. Years went by and life moved on. I met Kendra, the love of my life, and we built a future together. We had 2 children, Ellie and Marcus, and our life was simple but filled with love. I had created a family of my own, a family that supported me, not one that left me behind. But just when I thought I had finally healed from the wounds of the past, I got a message that shook me to my core. Alan had reached out asking to talk. After 5 years of silence, he contacted me through a random LinkedIn profile. He was in trouble again, and this time he needed my help. I was hesitant at first, unsure of how to respond, but I couldn't ignore him. I agreed to meet him, and when we did, it was clear that he was as trapped as I had been. The pressure to live up to our father's expectations had been suffocating for both of us. For the first time, I saw Alan as someone who had been just as hurt by our family as I had been. He was trying to escape the same cycle of emotional abuse that had held me captive for years. I offered him the same help that I had received years ago, a chance to start over. It wasn't easy and it took time, but Alan eventually left our parents' home and moved in with me and Kendra. We worked together to help him rebuild his life just as I had rebuilt mine. It wasn't a perfect situation, and there were moments of tension, but it was a step forward for both of us. As I reflect on all that has happened, I realize that the hardest part of healing is not forgetting the past, but choosing to move forward despite it. My family may have abandoned me, but in doing so, they gave me the opportunity to build something better. I may have been left behind at that rest stop, but I found my way home, and it wasn't to the family that had betrayed me. It was to a life I created on my own terms, a life that I'm proud of. And so as I look forward to the future with my wife, my children, and the family we've built, I know that I am finally free. I have everything I need, and no one can take that away from me. Growing up, I was always told that family was everything, that blood ran thicker than water. But as I learned in my early 20s, family doesn't always have your back. I had spent my entire life trying to win my family's approval, but nothing I did seemed to matter. It wasn't until I was 22, abandoned by my parents at a rest stop, that I fully understood how much I had been underestimated and mistreated by the very people who were supposed to love me the most. The day I was left behind was, in a way, the culmination of years of emotional neglect. My father, Banks, always belittled me, calling me useless from a young age, while my younger brother, Alan, became the golden child. The favoritism in our home was glaringly obvious. Alan could do no wrong, while I was constantly overlooked and ridiculed. My mother, Irene, was passive and rarely intervened when my father's cruelty took center stage. She let it happen without standing up for me. My only solace was the thought that I would eventually prove myself, that one day they would recognize my worth. That hope was shattered the day they left me at the rest stop. It started out like any other road trip, heading to my uncle's wedding in Colorado, but as the days wore on, tensions between my father, Alan, and I escalated. The verbal abuse was constant and I had no escape. When we stopped at a rest area in the middle of nowhere, I stepped out to use the restroom, leaving my phone and wallet behind, unaware that when I returned my family would be gone. They had driven off, leaving me stranded, alone, and with nothing. For hours I sat in that empty parking lot, hoping it was all just a cruel joke. But as the minutes stretched into hours, I realized the awful truth: they had really left me behind. When I finally contacted a stranger to get a ride to a nearby shelter, I didn't know where my life would go. I was scared, lost, and utterly betrayed by the people who had promised to love me unconditionally. But as the days passed, I found strength in my own ability to survive. I got a job washing dishes at a diner, saved enough money to buy a phone, and began to rebuild my life piece by piece. In time I found a small apartment, and while it wasn't glamorous, it was mine. I had no more expectations of my family, and I finally understood that I didn't need their approval to thrive. I had built a life for myself based on hard work and resilience. But as I started to move forward, my family's attempts to reach out began, though I didn't respond. Their calls and emails became a daily reminder of how they had abandoned me. They were no longer the family I had once dreamed of returning to. 5 years passed and life took a different turn. I met Kendra, and with her by my side, I built a life full of love, stability, and happiness. We had 2 children, and our home was filled with the warmth and security I had longed for. Yet even as I moved on, I couldn't fully let go of the past. My family still lingered in the background, and one day I found a message from Alan. He wanted to talk. When we met, I was shocked to find that Alan, the golden child, was just as trapped in our parents' web as I had been. He confessed that he was suffocating under their expectations, and that he had never been happy with the life they had planned for him. For the first time, I saw him as a person who had been hurt just like me. I offered him the same opportunity one had been given to break free and start over. It wasn't an easy road for Alan, but eventually he left our parents' home and moved in with Kendra and me. Together we helped him rebuild his life, and over time he began to find his own sense of peace. It was a bittersweet moment, seeing him finally break free of the chains our parents had placed on both of us. As I look back on everything that happened, I realized that the most powerful form of revenge was not what I did to my family but what I built for myself. I don't need their approval anymore. I've found love, success, and the family I always wanted. I am finally free. For as long as I can remember, I've lived in the shadow of my sister. Growing up, she was the golden child, the one who always seemed to do everything right. My parents, especially my mother, always showered her with attention, praise, and love, while I was left to fend for myself. No matter how hard I tried, no matter how much effort I put into everything, it was never enough to earn the same recognition. The comparison between my sister and me was constant, and as we grew older, the rift between us only widened. It's a difficult thing to watch someone you love, and someone who is supposed to love you back, constantly receive what you crave: validation, approval, and love. But it wasn't just the attention she got from our parents, it was the way she made me feel invisible, like I didn't matter. She had a way of overshadowing everything I did, and I began to feel like I was always in her shadow, never fully seen for who I was. Yet, I tried my best to maintain a relationship with her, even though it seemed like no matter what I did, she resented me. My wedding, however, would be the event that would finally make me stand up for myself. After years of being put down and overshadowed by my sister, I was getting married to the love of my life. I had been planning my wedding for over a year, and I was excited to finally experience something that was all mine, to celebrate my love, my happiness, and my future. But my sister once again tried to overshadow me. Her own wedding had ended in disaster a few months before mine, and my mother insisted that I should cancel or downplay my wedding to avoid upsetting her. My mother argued that holding a grand wedding so soon after my sister's abandonment would be hurtful to her. She suggested that I should move my wedding to a later date, to give my sister time to recover. But the more my mother insisted, the more I realized something. My wedding wasn't about my sister. It was about me. It was about the life I was building, and I refused to let my sister's pain dictate my happiness any longer. I had spent too many years bending over backward for her, trying to gain her approval, only to be left feeling small. My decision to move forward with my wedding was met with resistance, particularly from my mother and sister. They tried to manipulate me into making changes to accommodate my sister, despite the fact that I had already spent months planning this event. I knew that my wedding was not extravagant, that it was simple and intimate, and that it was a celebration of love, not excess. Yet, my family's actions made me feel like I was doing something wrong simply by being happy. The situation escalated when my sister accused me of being insensitive and selfish, saying that I was deliberately trying to hurt her by holding my wedding when she was still mourning hers. She even spread rumors about me, claiming I had humiliated her. I was crushed. It hurt to see her turn on me like that, especially after all the years I had spent trying to support her, but at the same time I realized that I had to protect my own happiness. Ultimately, I made the difficult decision to exclude my mother and sister from my wedding. It wasn't something I wanted to do, but I had to prioritize my own mental and emotional well-being. I couldn't continue to allow them to manipulate me, to make me feel guilty for living my life on my terms. In the end, I walked down the aisle to marry my fiancé, surrounded by friends and family who supported me and loved me for who I was. The ceremony itself was simple, but it was everything I had dreamed of. It wasn't just a wedding. It was a declaration of my independence. I had stood up for myself for the first time in my life, and I had taken control of my own story. As I moved forward, I realized that true happiness doesn't come from seeking approval from others. It comes from knowing your worth and refusing to let anyone make you feel less than what you are. Despite the painful journey, I walked away from that experience stronger and more confident than ever before. One of the most profound lessons we can learn from life is the importance of standing up for ourselves, especially when faced with the expectations and pressures of others. Often we allow family, friends, or society to define our worth, making us feel small or inadequate. But as we grow older, we realize that true happiness comes from embracing our own path and valuing ourselves, regardless of others' opinions. It is essential to set boundaries, not out of anger, but out of self-respect. We may encounter challenging situations where we are expected to give up our dreams or adjust to others' needs, but it is crucial to remember that our lives are ours to live. At every stage, we have the power to shape our future by choosing to prioritize our well-being, even if it means making tough decisions. While we may face judgment or criticism, embracing self-worth and making choices that align with our happiness is an act of strength and wisdom. Life is not about seeking approval from others, but about living authentically and with purpose. So remember, it's never too late to stand tall, honor your own voice, and live the life that feels right for you. Thank you for watching today's video. We hope this story resonated with you and gave you something to reflect on. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to Silent Wars so you never miss an update. Your support helps us bring more stories that can inspire and connect us all.